It was a summer night in June 1999, in a village called Clydach, not far from Swansea, Wales. A man called David Morris, a builder by trade with a history of violence, had come face to face with rejection. A woman named Mandy Power, 34, had turned him down, not just once, but coldly, brushing off his advances. For him, that rejection wasn't a moment. It became a festering wound. Mandy had a household that many envied. Her two daughters, Katie, aged 10, and Emily, aged 8. And her elderly mother, Doris Dawson, aged 80. Vulnerable, loved, unaware of the storm brewing just outside their door. That night, June 27th, 1999, someone burst into their home on Kelvin Road. Morris, driven by jealousy, rage, and wounded pride, broke in carrying an iron pole. He unleashed brutal violence, bludgeoning Mandy, Katie, Emily, and Doris. The iron pole falling again and again. The children were found cowering, one of them on the landing, another in her bedroom. Their mother beaten 38 times, the grandmother struck while still in bed. The house was set ablaze afterward, a fiery cover-up for darkness that had already crept in. In the days that followed, the gravity of what had happened took shape in cold facts. Firefighters rushed into smoke. Katie and Emily were rescued, but too late. The damage was done. But the case wouldn't move fast. David Morris wasn't arrested immediately, partly because he had an alibi, one later uncovered as false, and because the investigation was huge, complicated, emotional. Police gathered over 4,500 statements, thousands of exhibits, thousands of hours piecing together what happened. In 2002, at Swansea Crown Court, a jury found Morris guilty. He stood in court with little visible emotion as the verdict came in. Life for 4 murders so savage that the judge called them horrific, savage, without sympathy. His first conviction was later overturned, not because the jury thought him innocent, but because of a legal technicality. A conflict of interest with his defense solicitor. A retrial was ordered. In 2006, at Newport Crown Court, justice, again by jury, returned the same verdict. Morris was sentenced to life, minimum 32 years. Years passed. Morris always maintained innocence. His family, supporters, many in the public questioned whether the evidence was enough. What about paint on a gold necklace? A piece of jewelry found in the crime home that matched paint from Morris's own kitchen cupboards. Morris claimed the necklace wasn't his. Then, at one point, he changed his story. Then in 2021, new forensic review surfaced something more. A blood-stained sock found at the scene. Modern DNA testing showed mixed signals, but importantly, one piece, a YSTR profile, indicated David Morris, or a male relative on his father's side, was more likely than not to have contributed to the DNA on it. Not definitive proof of when or how the DNA got there, but another thread tying Morris to the scene. Then, in August 2021, Morris, age 59, died in Long Lartin Prison. He collapsed. The inquest later ruled his death was due to natural causes, ischemic heart disease and diabetes. He had served about 22 years behind bars. Even after his death, the case continues to echo, with questions and a painful resolve among the families of the victims. Was justice fully done? Could newer forensic tools have changed anything earlier? For some, closure remains distant. Others accept that perhaps all that could be done was done. Stephen James Hunter was born October 6, 1965. His life was quiet early on, but pain was there in shadows. He endured a troubled childhood filled with abuse, neglect, violence. It was the kind of beginning that sometimes warps what someone believes about safety and boundaries. By his early 20s, Stephen had developed a pattern. When women rejected him, arguments ensued, anger flared. Some of those moments got very dark. His first known murder happened on April 9, 1986, when an 18-year-old woman called Jacqueline Matthews rebuffed his sexual advance. Hurt, humiliated, he turned violent. He stabbed her after she refused him. She died, and he was arrested. He was put on trial. The court heard that Matthews rejected him, that he didn't take the no. He was sentenced in 1988, 16 years with a minimum of 13 years in prison. Stephen served his time, but the dark pattern didn't end. He was released on parole in December 2000. The world gave him another chance, but something broke again. On November 10th, 2012, only 9 days after his parole ended, Stephen met a 22-year-old woman named Sarah Cafferkey. They were connected through friends. They drank together, used some drugs. There was an argument, over words, over emotion, over something Sarah believed Stephen had said. Stephen lost control. In a moment described in court as explosive, he struck her, used a hammer and a knife. Sarah died. He didn't stop there. Trying to hide what had occurred, Stephen moved Sarah's body. He purchased concrete, acid, lime, plastic, everything needed to try to obscure her remains. He placed her body in a wheelie bin, filled it with concrete and lime, sealed it. Days later, Sarah's absence was noticed. Police began investigating. Sarah's family was devastated. Her mother, her father, they stood up in court and asked questions. How had someone with Stephen's history been free so soon? How had parole failed to protect her? When Stephen was brought to justice for Sarah's killing, the judge described the crime as callous, calculating, and brutal, especially given the attempt to cover up what he did. Stephen was sentenced on August 21st, 2013, to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. The case raised deep concerns about how parole systems handle violent offenders. How many second chances are safe to give when past patterns show real risk? Sarah's death and Stephen's story became a reminder that release on parole can carry consequences if oversight and risk assessment fail. There was a man called Andrew John Chabrol, once a Navy lieutenant, someone who should have held others to high standards. But power, unchecked and hurt, forged a darker path. The story begins with Melissa Harrington, a Navy petty officer second class. She served under Chabrol, and when his advances toward her crossed a line, she made a brave choice. She reported his behavior to his superior officers. That complaint hit him harder than she knew. In his view, it threatened both his pride and his future. Chabrol didn't accept that rejection quietly. After leaving the Navy in early 1991, he began writing journal entries, referring to something he called Operation Nemesis. It wasn't just notes. It was research and planning. He tracked Melissa's address, detailed her routines, and prepared for what he believed would be his revenge. On July 9th, 1991, Chabrol forced his way into Melissa's home while her husband was away. With him was a man called Stanley J. Berkeley, who would become part of what followed. When Melissa resisted, they say she tried to fight. And in that moment, the plan turned to violence. Chabrol tied her to a bed. She tried to break free. Her head was bound with tape. And then, when words and resistance weren't enough, Chabrol strangled her. She died. The crime didn't end there. Chabrol and his accomplice tried to hide what had happened, removing evidence, wrapping her body, concealing signs of what had been done. But investigators found what mattered. The forensic details, the physical evidence, the DNA. A case built not just on motive, but traceable proof. At trial, Chabrol pleaded guilty to capital murder, along with abduction and The gravity of what he did startled many, but perhaps more unnerving was how long he'd nurtured his grievance, letting rejection become obsession, letting silence turn into vengeance. In May 1992, a Virginia court sentenced him to death. He was executed in June 1993. He did not appeal, did not ask for clemency. His final days were quiet, but the impact of his actions wouldn't stay silent. Melissa Harrington's family, her friends, her colleagues, none would ever forget. Years later, a new controversy emerged. Not about whether the crime had occurred, but about how we remember those who commit crimes and those who suffer. Chabrol, despite everything, was granted burial at Arlington National Cemetery. For many veterans, this was painful. For those who knew Melissa, this felt wrong, a betrayal of what memorials should represent. What remains with us is the lesson: unchecked power, obsession, retaliation. These can twist someone from leader to predator. And when promises of safety fail, when settings meant to protect victims fall silent, the harms extend far beyond the moment of violence.